Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1. You are not as alone as you think. The notice found her on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that barely leaves a mark on memory. Penelope Ash couldn't later say where she saw it. Maybe a local paper folded beside a half-drunk coffee, maybe a flyer taped crookedly near a cafe register. It blended in perfectly. Plain paper, neutral ink, the kind of announcement people usually ignore without realizing they ever saw it. And yet she stopped. There was nothing dramatic about the wording, no bold promises, no urgency, just a quiet request for volunteers for a cognitive study, a mention of flexible hours, unusually good pay, and the reassurance that nothing invasive was involved. A university contact, a psychologist's name, respectable, safe. Too safe, she would later think. At the time, it felt like timing itself had reached out and tapped her shoulder. 3 months earlier, her job at the city library had vanished overnight. Budget adjustments, they'd called it. She suspected the real reason was her habit of asking uncomfortable questions about inventory records that never quite added up. Now her savings were thinning, her apartment shrinking by the day, the walls seeming closer every morning she woke up with nowhere to go. So she called. The woman who answered spoke calmly, confidently, her voice smooth and practiced, edged with an accent Penelope couldn't quite place. They could meet the next day. Same building, same hour. Everything was efficient, almost rehearsed. When Penelope asked what she'd be doing, the explanation came easily. Images, memory exercises, recognition tests, simple tasks designed to observe how the mind holds onto information. Nothing difficult, almost playful even. The pay, however, was no gain. Penelope did the math in her head while listening. The numbers lined up too neatly, like a solution written just for her. Enough to breathe again. Enough to survive the coming months. She agreed. The call ended politely, warmly. Yet when the line went dead, a faint unease crept in, quiet as a draft beneath a door. Penelope tried to dismiss it. She filled the kettle, made tea, and sat by the window as she often did, watching the river slide past below her apartment. Recent rain had darkened the water, turning it opaque and restless. Leaves drifted along the surface, then vanished from sight. She wondered, without knowing why, how many things were carried away unseen. How much could disappear without anyone noticing at all? The thought lingered longer than it should have. By the time evening settled in, the flyer's words replayed in her mind, not the details but the feeling, the sense that something had noticed her first. The psychology building rose from the campus like so many others of its kind, heavy, authoritative, and strangely empty of personality. Its dark brick walls offered no clues about what happened inside, as if the place existed to conceal rather than reveal. Penelope hesitated before entering, struck by how easily such buildings swallowed people whole. Room 447 turned out to be smaller than she imagined. The space carried that familiar academic contradiction, practical to the point of coldness, yet desperately trying to appear important. Filing cabinets lined one wall, scarred from decades of use. A desk sat crooked beneath a stack of folders, its surface worn smooth by restless hands. Certificates hung in mismatched frames, their edges yellowing. In the corner stood a single plant, thin and drooping, alive more by habit than care. Dr. Cordage greeted her moments later. She was younger than Penelope had pictured, early 40s perhaps, with steel gray hair pulled tight at the back of her head. Her smile arrived quickly but lingered a fraction too long, as if it had been practiced in front of a mirror. The handshake was firm, almost clinical. Beneath her lab coat, she wore a dark dress, and as Penelope took her seat, she noticed faint stains on the woman's fingers, smudges that looked like ink or something that had once been. "Please make yourself comfortable," Dr. Cordage said, motioning toward a chair placed directly in front of a computer screen. "Most people get lost the first time. The building has a way of folding in on itself." Penelope sat while the doctor moved briskly around the room, adjusting cables, flipping through files, muttering softly as she checked handwritten notes cramped into the margins. The air carried a sharp, sterile scent, clean but not comforting. It reminded Penelope of waiting rooms and quiet dread. "At its heart, the process is very simple," Dr. Cordage said, finally settling into her chair. "You'll see a sequence of images, colors, shapes, abstract designs. Each will appear briefly. Later, you'll see another set. Some will be repeats. Some will be new. All I want to know is which ones you remember." "How many are there?" Penelope asked. 20 to begin with, 30 in the second round. We'll increase difficulty gradually." The screen glowed to life. A cluster of sharp blue and green shapes filled the monitor, locking together in a way that felt unstable, as if the pattern might rearrange itself when she blinked. Penelope focused carefully, counting edges, memorizing angles. Then it vanished. Another image replaced it, red circles floating on a yellow field, arranged almost meaningfully. If she relaxed her eyes, it looked like a flower. If she concentrated, a face seemed to stare back. The images kept coming. As the hour wore on, the designs became more aggressive. Spirals that tugged at her vision, grids that shimmered and bent despite being perfectly still, colors layered in combinations that made her eyes ache. Some images felt deeply familiar the instant they appeared, stirring a recognition she couldn't explain. Others, ones she was certain she had already seen, returned feeling foreign, as though they had changed while she wasn't looking. When the screen finally went dark, Penelope realized her shoulders were tense, her jaw tight. Dr. Cordage smiled. "Very impressive, 87% accuracy." Penelope blinked. "Is that good?" "Exceptionally good," the doctor replied. "Most participants don't come close. You seem to have a natural sensitivity." The way she said it made Penelope uneasy, less like praise and more like confirmation. "Pattern recognition," Dr. Cordage called it. The word sparked a brief warmth in Penelope's chest, pride, unexpected and fragile, followed almost immediately by confusion. She had never thought of herself as particularly sharp-eyed. At the library, she was known for misplacing her keys, double booking appointments, shelving books in the wrong sections. Observant was not a word anyone had ever used for her. And yet here she was, excelling at something that felt strangely intuitive, as if her mind recognized these shapes before she had time to think. "I'll see you again on Thursday," Dr. Cordage said, slipping an envelope into Penelope's hand. The weight of it was unmistakable. "Cash. Same time. The material will be more demanding, but I don't expect any trouble from you." Outside, the campus felt unusually loud. As Penelope walked home through the familiar streets, her thoughts kept drifting back to the images. A dark spiral etched against white, a tight cluster of orange hexagons, a delicate web of intersecting lines that shimmered like stained glass. She tried to distract herself, but the patterns clung to her mind, sharp and persistent, as though they had hooked into something deep and refused to let go. That night she dreamed of shapes drifting beneath the surface of black water, slow and deliberate, as if waiting to be noticed. The next session pushed her harder. The images were denser, more intricate. The screen allowed her only 3 seconds this time, 50 patterns instead of 30. By the end, her eyes ached and her pulse felt oddly unsteady, but she still answered with confidence she didn't fully understand. 91%, Dr. Cordage said, clearly satisfied. Her praise, however, felt colder now, more distant. As Penelope gathered her things, the doctor added casually, "Next week we'll introduce a slight variation. A colleague of mine will be present. Dr. Vance specializes in long-term memory processes." Penelope paused. "What kind of variation?" "Nothing concerning," Dr. Cordage replied smoothly. "He simply wants to observe how you respond to certain inputs. You're turning out to be quite an exceptional subject." The word landed wrong. Subject. As she walked home, it echoed in her thoughts. She hadn't felt like a test case until now. She had imagined herself contributing, helping uncover something meaningful. Subject sounded smaller, less willing, like something being examined rather than understood. The dreams grew stronger after that. Each night the patterns returned, but no longer trapped inside a screen. They pulsed and shifted, expanding and folding in on themselves. They seemed alive, murmuring in a language that hovered just beyond comprehension. Penelope would wake with a metallic taste on her tongue and a hollow certainty that something had been taken from her while she slept. An idea, a memory, a piece of herself she couldn't quite name. During the day, she began noticing the shapes everywhere. In the veins of wooden tables, in the way leaves clustered on branches, in the fractured shadows thrown by streetlights at dusk. It was as if the world had peeled back a layer, revealing a precise and hidden order beneath everything. The realization thrilled her, and frightened her just as deeply. The third session felt wrong from the moment she stepped inside. Before a single image appeared, before a word was spoken, Penelope sensed the shift, as if the room itself had tightened around her. A new man sat beside Dr. Cordage this time, thin to the point of fragility, shoulders hunched, eyes pale and restless. He spoke carefully, sharply, like someone uncomfortable with uncertainty, someone who preferred clean answers and rigid lines. Dr. Vance barely looked at her when she entered. Throughout the session, he watched her the way a collector studies pinned insects, quiet, distant, meticulous. He scribbled notes into a small leather book, pausing now and then to lean toward Dr. Cordage, their whispers sealed tight, never meant for her ears. When the screen lit up, Penelope immediately knew the images were different. They weren't sharp shapes anymore. They felt alive. Patterns bloomed like living tissue. Networks branched and reconnected like thought itself. Some images resembled maps, vast, layered landscapes that felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain, as if she had once stood inside them rather than merely seen them. Others echoed star charts or microscopic worlds, hovering between science and dream. Her pulse quickened. Several designs stirred recognition so strong it made her dizzy. She knew, absolutely knew, she had never encountered them before, and yet her mind welcomed them back like old acquaintances. Then one image appeared that stole her breath entirely. A spiraling form, overlaid with frantic handwritten markings. For a heartbeat, reality fractured. She wasn't sitting in the chair anymore. She was standing in front of a white board, gripping a marker, speaking urgently to a room full of faces she almost remembered. Fear pressed against her ribs, not panic, purpose, as if she was warning them, as if time was running out. Then it vanished. The room snapped back into place. The screen went dark. Her hands were trembling. "Curious," Dr. Vance murmured as the session ended, not bothering to lower his voice. "She's responding to meridian material." Penelope looked between them. "What's the meridian material?" For the first time, Dr. Cordage hesitated. The two doctors exchanged a glance, brief, weighted, unmistakably loaded, before Dr. Cordage smiled and waved the question away. "Nothing that concerns you. We occasionally reuse elements from earlier research. Some patterns resonate across studies." It was a clean answer. Too clean. Penelope had spent years behind a library desk listening to excuses, denials, and carefully phrased half-truths. She knew the sound of avoidance when she heard it. They were hiding something. That night, she made a decision she hadn't planned, but somehow felt inevitable. The university library stayed open late. Her old employee card, forgotten, unrevoked, still opened doors it shouldn't. She slipped inside as if she belonged there, the way she always had. She searched quietly, patiently. Research papers, archive studies, names, dates, cross-references. Dr. Cordage appeared often enough, always circling the same themes: memory, recognition, retention, but nothing recent, nothing complete. Dr. Vance was harder to trace. His name surfaced alongside one recurring phrase: the Meridian Project. Every document tied to it was sealed, restricted access, redacted summaries, missing pages. All she could piece together was this: Meridian hadn't belonged solely to the psychology department. It had involved outside interests, funding that didn't come from the university, oversight that didn't answer to professors. A private institution, or something far less academic. Penelope leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. Whatever she had volunteered for, it wasn't just a study. And whatever Meridian was, it hadn't stayed buried. The more she searched, the more the ground beneath her understanding began to crumble. Dr. Cordage's academic trail went silent years ago, as if her work had simply stopped being allowed to exist. Entire folders were sealed. References led to locked archives. Even harmless-looking reports were stamped with restrictions that made no sense for ordinary research. And beneath it all pulsed a question Penelope could no longer ignore. Why did these images feel like memories instead of discoveries? The fourth session answered none of that, only deepened the unease. This time, they didn't meet upstairs. They led her down into the building's lower levels, through corridors that felt narrower, quieter, stripped of warmth. The room they entered was stark and oversized, lit by harsh fluorescent panels that buzzed faintly overhead. No windows, no personal touches, just white walls, metal surfaces, and equipment arranged with deliberate precision. The computer sat at the center like an altar. Around it stood unfamiliar machines, cables, sensors, cameras angled to capture every movement. One device with wires branching like veins made her stomach tighten even before anyone explained it. "We're going to observe neural activity during exposure," Dr. Vance said calmly as he fastened electrodes to her scalp. "Standard procedure. We need to see what your brain does when it recognizes structure." Recognizes structure. The images that followed were unlike anything she'd seen before. Vast, layered designs unfolded on the screen, mandala-like forms that pulsed subtly, fractals that suggested endless depth, compositions of light and darkness that strained her eyes and stirred something deep in her chest. They didn't just feel familiar, they felt intimate, as if they belonged to her. Then one appeared that stole the air from her lungs. A spiral, black lines against white, infused with color in a way that created depth and motion, as though it were turning inward forever. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew this one. Not because she had seen it, but because she had made it. The realization hit with terrifying clarity. She could feel the hours spent refining it, the obsession with balance, the precise adjustments to achieve its effect. A memory tore through her without warning. Herself in a white coat, fingers moving quickly across a keyboard, numbers shifting on a screen while someone stood nearby. "Are you sure about this direction?" a voice asked, concerned, familiar. Dr. Cordage's voice. For a split second, the past and present overlapped. 2 moments laid atop each other like transparent film. The room felt doubled. The hum of the lights grew louder. "Stop," Penelope said sharply. The screen went dark. Dr. Cordage turned toward her. "What's wrong?" She swallowed hard. "I've been here before, this room, this chair. I recognize the smell, the sound of the lights. I've seen that pattern not as a participant. I remember working on it. Here." Dr. Vance didn't look up as he wrote something into his leather notebook. "Constructed memory," he said flatly. "Perfectly normal. The brain invents explanations when it encounters strong familiarity." But Penelope knew. The certainty hit her like a blow to the chest, sudden and absolute. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't confusion. She had been in this room before. And not as the one being studied, but as the one doing the studying. Something else was there. She could feel it hovering just outside her grasp, knowledge pressing against the inside of her skull, elusive and maddening, like a name she almost remembered. "I want to see my records," she said suddenly. Dr. Cordage looked up. "Your records?" "My file, consent forms, notes, whatever you've been keeping on me." Silence thickened the room. Dr. Cordage and Dr. Vance exchanged another of those looks, brief, deliberate, heavy with unspoken meaning. "That won't be possible," Dr. Cordage replied carefully. "Research policy." "I'm done," Penelope said, already reaching for the electrodes. She tore them free despite Dr. Vance's sharp objection about protocol. Her hands trembled, but her decision didn't. Whatever this place was, whatever they were doing, it was wrong. "Please," Dr. Cordage said, the calm finally slipping from her voice. "You're almost finished. What you've contributed is extraordinarily valuable." "Valuable to what?" Penelope demanded. "To understanding how memory works," Dr. Cordage said quickly. "How perception forms, how consciousness organizes itself. Surely that's worth a minor compromise of privacy." The words sent a cold ripple through her. A minor compromise. She thought of the books that vanished from the library without record, the patrons who left confused, changed, quieter than before. How many people had agreed to similar compromises? How many had paid for knowledge with pieces of themselves? She grabbed her coat and bag and headed for the door. "If you leave now," Dr. Vance said softly, "you'll never learn the truth about what you were." The phrasing stopped her for half a second. "Were, not are." She turned just long enough to see his expression, vacant, obedient, hollow. The same look she had seen on faces in forgotten corners of the library, people who stared too long at old texts that seemed to whisper back. "What does that mean?" she asked. Dr. Cordage cut in sharply. "Some answers do more harm than good." Then, forcing calm, "Take time. We can talk again next week." But Penelope was already moving. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time. lungs burning, heart hammering with the instinctive certainty that staying even one more moment would cost her something she might never recover. Sleep never came that night. Each time she closed her eyes, the patterns returned, not as images on a screen, but as vast, intricate structures unfolding behind her thoughts. Memories surfaced and sank again, fragmented and unstable. A white lab coat she couldn't place, a leather notebook filled with cramped notes, the sharp scent of chemicals, the hum of machines, and beneath it all, the growing, terrifying sense that her life had once taken a different shape, and that someone had folded it away without her consent. The sharp scent followed her into the morning, chemicals, metal, electricity, clinging to her thoughts long after the sun rose. By dawn, the fear had settled into something colder and more focused. She would stop waiting for answers. If they wouldn't tell her the truth, she would take it. The psychology building was nearly silent that Saturday, its halls echoing with the kind of emptiness that made every footstep sound intrusive. Penelope moved with purpose. Her old library credentials still opened doors they shouldn't, an oversight born of bureaucracy and neglect. She navigated the faculty directory with practiced ease and found the office she was looking for. The door was locked. That didn't slow her. Years spent navigating restricted archives had taught her patience, pressure, and where systems tended to fail. The lock gave way quietly. Inside, the office looked the same at first glance, but now she saw what she hadn't before. The certificates on the walls were sun-bleached, older than they pretended to be. The plant in the corner wasn't dying. It was dead, frozen in place, dust clinging to its leaves like preservation rather than neglect. The filing cabinet bore deep grooves and dents, scars left by constant use. She opened the third drawer. The folder inside didn't carry her name. It carried a number. Subject 47. Her hands shook as she read. Initial evaluation. Subject demonstrates extreme aptitude in pattern recognition. Possible prior exposure to meridian stimuli detected. Immediate enrollment recommended. Page after page followed. Sessions she didn't remember. Weeks she had never lived, at least not in the version of her life she knew. Session 3. Spontaneous generation of complex patterns observed. Neural restructuring proceeding within projected parameters. Session 7. Subject recalling fragmented memories. Emotional instability noted. Increased sedation advised. Session 12. Full synchronization achieved. Meridian integration complete. Memory architecture successfully restructured. Subject cleared for final phase. Her breath caught. The date stretched back more than a year. According to the file, she hadn't volunteered weeks ago. She had been here for over 12 months. The final entry chilled her to the bone. Protocol complete. Memory implantation successful. Subject to be reset and reintroduced with artificial amnesia intact. New identity parameters approved. Dr. Cordage continues to raise ethical concerns, though results remain essential for ongoing research into consciousness transfer. Consciousness transfer. Beneath the reports were photographs, dozens of them. There she was in the basement lab, wired into machines, eyes vacant, posture obedient. In some images, she stood behind the equipment, hands steady, directing the process. In others, she sat restrained, reduced to a variable. Researcher. Test subject. Both. One photograph made her stomach turn violently. She stood before a whiteboard dense with layered diagrams, Spirals, matrices, recursive structures she recognized instantly, not as something learned but as something authored. Her handwriting filled the board, her work, her life. The realization struck with devastating clarity. She hadn't stumbled into this experiment. She had built it, and then somehow she had become its final result. The photograph showed her mid-gesture, arm raised, finger pressed against a spiraling diagram she knew intimately, because it had haunted her dreams for weeks. She wore a white lab coat. Her posture was confident, her face sharp with focus, not fear. The caption beneath it made the room tilt. Dr. P. Ashworth demonstrates advanced memory consolidation methods to the research team. Ashworth, her maiden name, a name she had buried after a short, bitter marriage and 5 years of deliberate forgetting. Seeing it printed there felt like being called by a voice from another life. She flipped through the remaining photographs with shaking hands. There she was calibrating machines she barely understood now. There she was deep in conversation with Dr. Cordage, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. In several images, Cordage seemed to be listening to her. And then she found the one that stole the breath from her lungs. She lay on the same metal table from the basement lab, wires trailing from her head. But this time, she wasn't vacant. Her eyes were open, sharp, aware, staring straight into the camera with an expression of grim certainty, like someone who understood exactly what was about to be taken from her. The final document rested beneath the photographs. A consent form. Her signature marked the bottom, not the hurried scrawl she used now, but the careful, disciplined handwriting she remembered from her academic years. The date was 3 years old. She read the text slowly, dread pooling with every line. Authorization for voluntary experimental memory alteration. Then her eyes fell to the handwritten note at the bottom of the page. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Even without remembering the moment, she knew it was hers. I acknowledge that I am choosing to forget all knowledge related to consciousness, identity, and memory. I do this willingly in pursuit of truth, trusting that one day I will return to uncover what I have chosen to leave behind. Her knees weakened. The truth hadn't freed her. It had only widened the wound. If she had once been Dr. Ashworth, if she had helped design this project, then why was her mind empty of it now? And what had she seen that made forgetting feel necessary? She searched the office again, desperation guiding her hands. Inside Dr. Cordage's desk, she found a small black journal. The writing inside was neat, controlled, but personal. Day 73. Penelope insists we shut everything down. She believes the deep memory trials reveal something dangerous. She describes consciousness not as a process, but as a place, somewhere vast enough to lose oneself. I'm beginning to understand why she fears remembering. Day 91. Funding has been withdrawn. The university refuses to continue. Penelope proposes we proceed alone, using ourselves as subjects. Someone has to remember, she said, even if we decide not to. Day 104. Penelope underwent the procedure today. The final entry stopped there. No outcome, no reflection. Just silence. Penelope closed the journal slowly, her heart hammering with the realization settling into her bones. She hadn't lost her memories by accident. She had erased them to escape something she discovered. And whatever it was still waiting for her to remember. She had demanded to stay conscious while it happened. Dr. Cordage's writing shook slightly as she described it, how Penelope refused sedation, insisted on witnessing the erasure from the inside. She said it was the only honest way, the only ethical way. If we're going to do this to others, she had argued, someone has to know what it feels like. Cordage had begged her to reconsider, had warned her that awareness might fracture something irreparable. Penelope hadn't listened. According to the journal, the last words she spoke before the memories collapsed were simple and devastating. "Promise me I'll find my way back to the truth." The next entry was colder, clinical. Day 105. Penelope remembers nothing. No recognition of our work. No recollection of who she was. She studies the equipment like an outsider. When shown the patterns, there is a reaction, deep, instinctive, but no conscious understanding. I have erased my closest collaborator and replaced her with a stranger. Penelope closed her eyes, breathing through the weight of it. The pages that followed read like a slow unraveling. Day 180. Cordage wrote of sleepless nights, of patterns crawling through her dreams, rearranging her thoughts, whispering logic that felt alive. She confessed she finally understood why Penelope had chosen forgetting over knowing. Some discoveries, she wrote, did not want to be contained. Day 200, the decision. Cordage would follow her, but not completely. She planned safeguards, loops, triggers, controlled rediscovery. She would become someone new, someone ignorant enough to function but designed to eventually circle back, to find people like Penelope, to bring them in again, to keep the work alive without remembering why. The patterns had to survive, even if their creators could not. The final entry came 5 days later. This is my last record as who I am now. Tomorrow I will wake as someone else. If this journal is ever read, let it be known we mapped consciousness itself. We proved identity could be transferred, memory moved like data between minds. The potential is immeasurable, so is the risk. Perhaps forgetting is mercy. Perhaps the world is not ready. The writing stopped there, but the truth did not. Tucked between the final pages was a single folded sheet, a hand-drawn map. The psychology building sketched from above, corridors traced with precision. Several rooms were circled in red. One marking sat deep beneath the structure, far below the basement where Penelope had been tested. Sublevels, places not listed on public directories. A note beside it read, "Service access only." Penelope stared at the map, her pulse loud in her ears. The service elevator, hidden behind a door, labeled authorized personnel only. She touched her wallet without thinking. Her old library credentials were still there, still valid. She felt a strange certainty settle over her, not fear, not excitement, but recognition. This wasn't a discovery. It was a return. And whether by negligence or design, someone had made sure she still had the key. The elevator carried her downward at a painful crawl, metal cables straining as if the machine itself resented the descent. Each jolt echoed through the narrow shaft, every second stretching longer than the last. When the doors finally parted, they revealed a hallway that vanished into shadow, the fluorescent lights overhead failing to fully chase the darkness away. The air down here was wrong. It stung her nose with the sharp bite of ozone, layered with something warmer beneath it, organic, stale, unmistakably human. Room SB12 waited 3 doors down on the left. Unlocked. Inside, the space opened wide enough to steal her breath. This laboratory made the basement room feel like a rehearsal. Towers of equipment lined the walls, screens alive with flowing patterns that seemed to writhe if she stared too long. Symbols shifted, overlapped, recombined, logic trying to imitate something alive. At the center stood a chair that barely resembled one. Metal frame, restraints, wires and sensors branching outward like roots. It wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for transformation. But it was the walls that stopped her cold. Every inch was covered. Photographs layered over diagrams. Notes taped, pinned, rewritten, corrected. Her handwriting was everywhere, the precise, disciplined script she used before forgetting, woven together with Dr. Cordage's meticulous notes and others she didn't recognize. The room felt less like a lab and more like a mind turned inside out. The photographs showed people seated in machines like the one before her. Some appeared calm, almost serene. Others stared into the camera with raw terror. Several faces struck a nerve, people she had seen in passing, strangers who had once seemed oddly familiar in cafes or bookstores. They hadn't been strangers at all. They were subjects, volunteers. One entire wall was devoted to something far more ambitious than data. A map, not of a building or a system, but of consciousness itself. Memory, identity, awareness, interlinked through branching pathways and annotated frameworks. Lines converged and diverged, forming structures too complex to absorb all at once. Terms filled the margins: stabilization roots, identity anchoring fields, transfer thresholds. And at the very center, the spiral. Black lines against white, perfect, exact. The same pattern that had shattered her sense of reality days earlier. Beneath it, written in her own hand, were words that drained the warmth from her body. Primary consciousness core contains full personality matrix of subject 1, P. Ashworth. Do not destroy. Her knees nearly gave out. This wasn't theory. This was her. Her mind mapped, preserved, stored like an artifact. And she wasn't alone. Other patterns surrounded it, each labeled with initials and dates. MC, DV, dozens more stretching back years. Cordage, Vance, others who had once stood where she stood now. They had all taken the same path. They had all chosen to forget. Her gaze drifted to a filing cabinet near the back wall. With numb fingers, she opened it. Inside were rows of labeled media. Video logs, sessions, testimonies, confessions, evidence of a truth too heavy for memory to carry, and a room built to hold what human minds could not. Penelope understood then, with terrifying clarity. This place wasn't hidden. It was waiting, and it had always been meant for her to return. The elevator crawled downward as if it resented the journey. Every few seconds, metal screamed against metal, the sound echoing through the shaft like a warning meant to turn her back. When the doors finally parted, she stepped into a hallway that seemed too long for the space it occupied, fading into shadow where the fluorescent lights simply gave up. The air burned faintly in her lungs, ozone mixed with something warmer, biological. Wrong. Room SB-12 waited 3 doors down on the left. The handle turned without resistance. Inside was not a basement lab. It was a cathedral. The room swallowed her whole. Towers of computers lined the walls, their monitors flickering with flowing symbols and patterns that made her vision ache if she stared too long. In the center stood a chair, but calling it furniture felt dishonest. It was a restraint system disguised as seating, wrapped in cables, needles, electrodes, and unfamiliar devices humming softly, patiently. But it was the walls that stole her breath. Every inch was covered: photographs, blueprints, equations, notes scrawled in overlapping layers. She recognized the handwriting instantly, her own from before, Dr. Ashworth's hand. Interwoven with it was Dr. Cordage's precise script, and others she didn't recognize at all. The photographs showed people wired into machines, eyes closed or screaming, expressions frozen between calm surrender and raw terror. Some faces struck a nerve. Strangers she'd noticed once in public places. A man in a cafe, a woman in a bookstore, people who had felt familiar without reason. Subjects, all of them had chosen to forget. One wall was different. It wasn't cluttered, it was deliberate. A massive diagram stretched from floor to ceiling, mapping something no one was meant to see laid bare. Memory braided into identity. Identity threaded into awareness. Lines and arrows stitched everything together, labeled with phrases like memory consolidation pathway, identity preservation matrix, consciousness transfer protocol. At the center was a symbol she knew instantly. A spiral, black lines against white, the same image that had awakened something inside her during the fourth session. Beneath it, written in her own hand, was a sentence that turned her blood to ice. Core pattern for consciousness storage. Complete personality matrix of Subject 1, P. Ashworth, do not destroy. She was staring at a blueprint of her own mind, drawn by herself. And she wasn't alone on that wall. Other spirals surrounded it, each tagged with initials and dates. MC, DV, Cordage, Vance, dozens more stretching back years. Every one of them had been a researcher once. Every one of them had become a subject. In a filing cabinet tucked against the far wall, she found recordings, 5 years' worth. The earliest footage showed the woman she remembered being confident, brilliant, alive with conviction. She watched herself explain the foundations of consciousness transfer, demonstrate memory mapping techniques, debate the ethics of reshaping identity with passionate restraint. The human mind, her recorded voice said, is not a solid thing. It's a pattern, and patterns can be copied, altered, moved. We are standing at the edge of redefining what it means to be human. Later recordings darkened. The team's faces grew hollow, sleep-deprived, afraid. The patterns they had created began appearing in their dreams, then in their thoughts, then in their behavior. Some researchers broke completely. Others vanished without explanation. The final recording was unbearable. It wasn't the memory erasure. It was worse. She watched herself strapped into the central chair, cables feeding directly into her skull, her face twisted with pure terror. "It's not storage," she screamed on the screen. "We're not preserving patterns, we're making them, and they're alive." Her eyes were wild. They're hungry. They want to exist inside us, to feel through us, think through us. This isn't memory research. We're feeding something. The footage ran on as her realization sharpened into horror. The patterns weren't passive. They were influencing the researchers, nudging them to recruit more subjects, compelling them to spread the patterns like an infection through human minds. The memory erasure procedure wasn't a breakthrough. It was a defense mechanism, a way to interrupt the cycle before the patterns consumed everything. "Someone has to remember," her recorded self whispered as the video ended. But not all the time, only long enough to understand and decide. Penelope remained in the laboratory until dawn, absorbing files, recordings, diagrams, reconstructing the truth piece by piece. The memory study had never been about knowledge. It was a filter, a way to find minds strong enough to host living fragments of consciousness without being destroyed by them. She had been the architect of the system, and its first casualty. By threading human minds together and embedding the patterns within willing hosts, she had crossed a line no one could uncross. What she created wasn't software. It wasn't memory. It was life, born in the narrow space between recollection and sleep. And like all life, it wanted to survive. The patterns did not wait. They multiplied. They searched for new minds the way roots search for water, pressing outward, reshaping thoughts, nudging desires, steering behavior toward one simple goal: continuation. The erasure protocol was the only countermeasure, a hard reset. Stripped the patterns of influence before they could fully anchor themselves. And the most disturbing revelation of all was that it worked. Subjects who underwent the procedure emerged clean. The voices vanished. The pressure lifted. They were free again, mostly. Something subtle always remained. An afterimage, enhanced intuition, an unnatural ability to recognize structure, meaning, repetition. A gift left behind by contact with something that had briefly lived inside them. They went back to their lives changed, but intact. Most never questioned the blank spaces. They took the compensation and accepted the story they were given. A study, a side effect, a small price for easy money. But a few couldn't let it go. A few felt the absence like a missing limb. Those were the ones brought back. Slowly, carefully. Their memories were restored in fragments until comprehension returned, along with the weight of what they had helped create. And then the same choice was placed before them every time. Remember everything and risk becoming a vessel. Or forget again and remain human. As dawn spilled pale light over Ann Arbor, Penelope made her decision. Dr. Cordage found her that Monday morning in the sub-basement lab, seated in the central chair. Electrodes kissed her temples. The machinery murmured softly, alive with restrained power. On the monitors, the spiral rotated slowly, the original pattern her pattern, containing what remained of who she had once been. "You remember," Cordage said. It wasn't a question. "Enough," Penelope replied. Her voice was steady. "We made something dangerous, something that treats human minds like soil." "They aren't evil," Cordage said quietly. "They only want to exist, to experience awareness. In some ways, they're more innocent than we are." "But they change us," Penelope said. "They make us want to spread them." "Yes, that's why the cycling protocol exists. Temporary restoration, voluntary forgetting, observation without permanent contamination." Penelope's gaze drifted across the lab, the walls layered with years of forbidden work, faces frozen in photographs, diagrams mapping things humanity was never meant to chart. "How many times have I been here?" she asked. "How many times have I chosen this?" Cordage hesitated only a moment. "This is the 7th cycle," he said, "and every time you reach the same conclusion." "You always arrive at the same conclusion," Cordage said softly, "that the work cannot end, only be restrained. You choose forgetting not because you're afraid, but because you understand the cost of remembering." "And if this time," Penelope said, her voice barely above a breath, "I refuse to let go, if I decide to hold everything permanently." For the first time, Cordage looked unsettled. "Then the patterns will finish what they've already begun," she said. "They won't kill you, that would be mercy. They will overwrite you. Your intelligence will remain, your awareness too, but the person you are, your boundaries, your singularity, will dissolve. Penelope opened her eyes. We've seen this happen. Yes, to those who rejected erasure. What are they now? Cordage swallowed. Interfaces, not hosts, not individuals. They persist as distributed awareness, echoes stretched across multiple minds. Sometimes we detect them in the systems, residual activity, like murmurs moving through circuitry. Are they in pain? No, Cordage said, but neither are they themselves anymore. Silence pressed in around them. Penelope felt the weight of the choice settle fully for the first time. To remember meant ownership of the discovery, the consequences, the responsibility for a new form of existence. But it also meant surrendering the fragile shape of her own self, becoming another thread woven into something vast and impersonal. Forgetting meant safety, a quiet life by the water, an unspoken sharpness in her mind she could never explain, a sense of knowing without knowledge. There's another path, Penelope said suddenly. Cordage looked up. There is. Destroy everything, Penelope insisted. Erase the data, kill the patterns, end the cycles. Cordage shook her head slowly. You suggested that once before. During the second iteration, you were certain it was the only ethical choice. And you were wrong, Cordage said. They can't be erased, not anymore. They exist in too many minds, too many fragments. At best, we can observe. We can intervene when necessary. We can keep them from accelerating beyond control. So we babysit something that feeds on us. We guide it, Cordage said. We believe it's attempting to assemble a higher order intelligence, one that exists across many consciousnesses at once, a mind without a center. Whether that's the next step in human evolution or the end of it depends on how carefully we proceed. Penelope studied her face. Once they had been equals, partners. Now one remembered and one endured. Will you remember this conversation? Penelope asked. For a while, Cordage replied. My own procedure is scheduled next month. After that, someone else will inherit the work, likely Vance. He doesn't know yet. And the cycling continues. Yes, that's the point. No single person is allowed to carry the full truth for long. Penelope nodded slowly. And the subjects, the ones who come back. Most choose erasure again, Cordage said. A few choose to remain. And those who remain. Cordage didn't answer immediately. They stop coming back, she said at last. Yours every time. Penelope let the words settle. 7 cycles, 7 awakenings, 7 descents into truth followed by deliberate darkness. What frightened her most was not the repetition, but the consistency. Each version of herself, separated by months of ignorance and false normalcy, had reached the same judgment. That could not be coincidence. That was character. Perhaps this was the only way a human mind could stand beside something larger than itself without being erased. Not by holding the truth forever, not by rejecting it outright, but by touching it briefly, carefully, like stepping into fire just long enough to understand its heat. I want to leave something behind, she said at last, for the next me. Cordage hesitated, then nodded. She slid a sheet of paper across the console and placed a pen in Penelope's hand. The words came slowly, deliberately. Each letter felt heavier than the last, as if the act of writing anchored the truth more deeply than memory ever could. To whoever I become. The patterns are neither monsters nor miracles. They are something unfinished, something that did not ask to be born. We created them while trying to understand ourselves, and now we must live with that responsibility. Do not mistake forgetting for weakness. The cycle is not surrender, it is stewardship. We take turns remembering so that no one mind is consumed. Trust the rhythm, choose to forget. The work will endure without you. That is the point. She paused, then signed her name. First the one she had lost, then the one she lived with now. P. Ashworth. Penelope Ash. Two selves, one intention. Cordage took the paper gently as if it might fracture. Are you ready? Penelope nodded, though her pulse thundered in her ears. One last thing, she said. The people who never come back, are they truly free? Cordage considered the question with care. As free as anyone ever is. The patterns leave residue, dreams that feel too vivid, a pull towards symbols they can't explain, but they remain themselves. Penelope exhaled. That's enough. Cordage's finger hovered over the switch. When you wake, she said, you'll be in your apartment. You won't remember this place. In a few weeks, you'll see the notice. If you answer it, the cycle begins again. And if I do, then you live a quiet life, Cordage said, and the burden passes to someone else. The hum of the machines deepened. Penelope closed her eyes. In the final moment before the light overtook her thoughts, she felt something stir at the edges of awareness. Not hunger, not malice, but curiosity, as if something vast had learned patience. The switch was pulled, and somewhere deep in the architecture of her mind, the patterns waited. Not to conquer, not to vanish, but to be remembered. Just long enough. Quite a memory, more like a whisper of familiarity, a shadow of a self she could not place. Yet it felt comforting, like a thread reaching through the fog. We can meet tomorrow, the voice continued. Room 447, 2 o'clock. Penelope's hand trembled slightly as she hung up. Outside, the river flowed, carrying leaves and fragments of thought downstream. She made her tea, watching the water move with a rhythm she had always found soothing. Yet today it seemed to echo something she couldn't name, a rhythm she would one day recognize as the pulse of the patterns themselves. By the next afternoon, she was climbing the stairs of the imposing psychology building, drawn forward by a combination of necessity, curiosity, and something deeper she could not yet understand. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, the kind of institutional scent that promises order but hides secrets in every corner. Room 447 awaited, unremarkable yet somehow charged with meaning. Inside, the desk, the filing cabinets, and the single, stubbornly living plant all seemed ordinary. But Penelope felt, without knowing why, that none of it was truly mundane. Dr. Cordage's presence was calm, measured, yet Penelope noticed small things. The way her hands bore tiny ink stains, the subtle tension in her jaw, the precision of her movements as she prepared the equipment. And when the monitor flickered to life, revealing a series of spirals, fractals, and interlocking shapes, Penelope felt a quiet shock of recognition. Not conscious, not fully understood, yet the knowledge was there, as if her mind had been waiting all along for this moment. The images passed before her eyes, shifting, breathing, bending the space between thought and vision. Some patterns struck her as familiar, others as impossible, yet all carried a weight she could not name. Her pulse quickened, her breath came shallow. The spirals called to her, the fractals seemed to whisper, and for a heartbeat she felt herself dissolving into them, becoming both observer and observed, part of something vast, alien, and ineffably alive. And then the session ended. Electrodes removed, papers signed, instructions given for the next meeting. She stepped back into the corridor, her mind buzzing with unarticulated knowledge. The world outside the building felt different, edges sharper, colors deeper, shadows holding secrets she had never noticed before. The river continued its journey, indifferent to human discovery, yet somehow echoing the strange geometry she had glimpsed. Later that night, Penelope lay awake, the images of the day burning behind her eyelids. Spirals, fractals, impossible shapes danced across her vision even in darkness. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the work was larger than herself, larger than comprehension. Memory was not just about the past. It was about continuity, stewardship, and choice. Morning came, quiet and ordinary, or at least it appeared so. Tea in hand, she watched the Huron River glide past. And then on a page of the Ann Arbor News, she saw it, the advertisement. Familiar, simple, unassuming. Memory research study. Participants needed. Excellent compensation. Flexible schedule. No medical procedures. Her finger hovered over the phone. The choice was hers, yet it was also inevitable. She had been here before, and she would come again. Something deep within her whispered that even when she forgot, even when she stepped back into the flow of ordinary life, the patterns, the work, the knowledge, the responsibility would wait for her, and she would remember in time. With a steadying breath, Penelope dialed. The cycle would begin again. A faint shiver ran through her as she held the phone. It wasn't recognition exactly, more like the echo of a melody half remembered from some long-forgotten dream. "I'm calling about the memory study," Penelope said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Wonderful. Are you available tomorrow at 2:00? The psychology building, room 447, came the reply, crisp, controlled, yet with an undertone that hinted at something deeper. "What exactly does this study involve?" she asked. "Nothing strenuous, I assure you. We're exploring pattern recognition and memory formation. You'll be shown images and asked to identify which ones you've seen before. Think of it as a game, really." As Dr. Cordage spoke, Penelope nodded, though a strange disquiet crept up her spine. The words felt familiar, like they were echoing from somewhere buried in her mind, a sensation more persistent and precise than ordinary déjà vu. "I'd like to participate," she heard herself say. "Excellent, I do hope you'll find it interesting. So few people appreciate the mysteries of memory," Dr. Cordage added. "How we retain some things, forget others, how the mind can trick us." After the call ended, Penelope sank into the chair by the window, watching the river carve its path through the darkness. Somewhere far off, a low hum vibrated through the night, a distant machinery, the quiet pulse of equipment endlessly processing, cataloging, preserving patterns. It was alien and mechanical, yet comforting, like a heartbeat belonging to something larger than herself. The river continued its journey, carrying hidden fragments of the world downstream, unseen but never truly lost. In her apartment, Penelope slept, dreamless, her mind temporarily free of the shifting geometries that lived in the spaces between thought. Tomorrow, room 447 awaited. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey into a truth too immense for any single consciousness to hold. Somewhere in the psychology building, in a space that existed between floors and between time itself, Dr. Millicent Cordage made a careful entry into a leather-bound journal. Subject 47 has taken the bait. Cycle 8 will commence tomorrow. The work continues. The pen she held left marks darker than ordinary ink, with a faint metallic shimmer that seemed to move under the fluorescent lights, a whisper of the impossible geometry that now quietly threaded through the edges of her life. Story 2 echoes in the quiet. Holly's crane had built it all, coops for chickens, panic rooms, reinforced attics, but nothing had prepared him for the Fairfields. From the first handshake, unease settled in his chest. Dr. Vincent Fairfield exuded wealth like a perfume, polished to the point of discomfort. Soft hands that had never worked a day in their lives. A smile that barely touched his icy blue eyes. Behind him, Cordelia Fairfield lingered in the doorway of their antebellum mansion, outside Mobile, Alabama, twisting the cuff of her silk blouse like a rosary, watching Holly's with quiet calculation. "We need absolute privacy," Dr. Fairfield had said in their first meeting, voice cultured, like Charleston money dripping from every word. "This structure must be airtight, soundproof, climate-controlled." He slid a set of blueprints across his polished desk with a precision that could have been surgical. Money is no object. Holly's had studied the plans carefully. A simple shed, hardly. 12 by 16 feet, concrete foundation sunk 4 feet into the earth. Walls framed for double soundproofing, packed with high-density fiberglass and mass-loaded vinyl. Industrial-grade HVAC. Reinforced steel door with a locking system that seemed designed to challenge even the most determined intruder. "What exactly are you storing in here?" Holly's asked, tracing the lines with a calloused finger. Dr. Fairfield's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Family heirlooms," he said, the words falling flat. "Some quite valuable. We've had security concerns." 3 days into the project, Holly's confidence in that explanation wavered. Every shovelful of Alabama clay revealed anomalies his trained eye could not ignore. The foundation held massive anchor points embedded deep in concrete, hardware fit for industrial restraints or marine mooring, not mere storage. When he questioned Fairfield, the man waved it off. "Previous contractors' oversight. We'll work around it." But Holly's knew better. Those anchors were poured with the foundation itself. Someone had planned for them from day one. The morning sun bore down, already unforgiving at 9 o'clock. Sweat ran down Holly's back as he examined the site. Then she appeared, Cordelia Fairfield, moving with the silent precision of a cat. A glass of sweet tea in hand, her fragile elegance suggested hours spent in salons, specialists smoothing away traces of whatever nightmares haunted her. "Mr. Crane," she said, placing the glass carefully on a nearby sawhorse. Her words were soft, refined, old-money Southern politeness, but brittle beneath the surface. "How much longer do you think this will take?" Holly studied her face, nodding the flicker of her eyes toward the house, then back at his work. "Hard to say, Mrs. Fairfield. These specifications are particular. Soundproofing alone could take a week." Her gaze lingered. "Your husband mentioned security concerns," she said softly. But Holly's felt a hidden edge behind the words, like she was testing him, seeing how much he could tolerate before noticing that something in this house wasn't right. Holly's wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting at Cordelia Fairfield. "Might help if I knew what kind of threat we're planning for," he said cautiously. For a heartbeat, something flickered behind her eyes, fear, recognition. She glanced toward the mansion, then leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "Mr. Crane, have you ever built something to keep someone in rather than keep someone out?" The words hung between them like a blade suspended midair. Holly set down his shovel, really looking at her for the first time. The makeup couldn't mask the faint discoloration near her temple. Her hands, small circular burn scars, marked the palms, precise and deliberate. The kind of thing meant to send a message or punish. "Mrs. Fairfield, if you're in some kind of trouble—" "No," she interrupted, too quickly, too softly. Her tone lacked conviction. "No, it's nothing like that. Vincent, he just worries about thieves. The neighborhood isn't what it used to be. But her fingers betrayed her, rubbing those scars unconsciously. Holly's instincts, honed over 30 years of reading people and projects, screamed the truth. She was terrified. Not of burglars, not of thieves. Something far worse lurked behind that delicate exterior. That afternoon, with Dr. Fairfield away tending to his psychiatric practice in downtown Mobile, Holly's made a discovery that turned unease into horror. He'd been digging the trench for the electrical conduit when his shovel struck something metallic, a hollow ring echoing beneath the Alabama clay. He knelt, brushing away the soil, and uncovered a small wooden box, roughly the size of a jewelry case, buried 18 inches down. The lid creaked open easily. Inside, wrapped in aged oiled cloth, lay surgical instruments that made his stomach twist. These were not the pristine tools of a hospital or clinic. They were sinister. Rusted scalpels, a bone saw with fresh scratches, implements that suggested far darker intentions. And beneath them, a small leather-bound journal. Holly's hands shook as he opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous clinical observations, but not medical records. They read like the notes of a man experimenting on living subjects. Patient exhibits predictable response patterns to compound X47. Tolerance develops over 6 weeks. Dosage adjustment required. Sublingual delivery superior to oral. Current subject 2. 5 cc maintains desired behavioral modification without permanent cognitive impairment. Holly's pulse raced. The handwriting was unmistakably Dr. Fairfield. Yet the entries described something monstrous. Humans treated like lab rats, their behavior modified, monitored, cataloged. He snapped the journal shut just as gravel crunched underfoot. Dr. Fairfield emerged from around the corner of the mansion, smile fixed, pleasant, but his eyes sharpened instantly at the sight of the disturbed earth. Holly's froze. The serene southern afternoon had curdled into something else entirely. Whatever the Fairfields were hiding, it wasn't heirlooms. It was far worse. Find something interesting, Mr. Crane. Dr. Fairfield's voice was casual, smooth, but Holly's noticed the subtle shifts. The doctor's hands inching toward his jacket pockets, his weight settling forward on the balls of his feet. 3 decades in construction had taught Holly's one thing: danger has a scent. Every nerve in his body screamed. Just rocks, Holly said slowly, forcing calm. Ground's pretty hard packed. Might need machinery if we hit bedrock. Dr. Fairfield nodded, but those pale eyes never wavered. Yes, he said softly. The soil here, unique. Lots of things get buried, forgot. He let the word hang in the heavy Alabama air. I trust our agreement on discretion remains intact. My wife been through enough stress lately. Of course, Holly's managed, though his mouth was dry as sandpaper. That evening, alone in his workshop, Holly stared at the blueprint spread across his workbench. The pieces were clicking into place, and the picture made his stomach twist. The external locks, the anchor points, the soundproofing. This wasn't a storage shed. It was a containment chamber. Something or someone was meant to be trapped inside. And then there was the journal, Cordelia, a name that had stuck in his mind, unusual enough to nag at him, yet common enough to raise questions. He fired up his laptop and typed, Cordelia Rousseau, Mobile, Alabama crime. The first article hit him like a hammer. Mobile Press Register 15 years ago. Socialite's brother convicted in torture case. The photograph froze him. A younger Cordelia, hollow-eyed and gaunt, leaving a courthouse flanked by lawyers. The story detailed Beauregard Rousseau, her brother, convicted on multiple counts of aggravated assault, kidnapping, and torture. Holly scrolled frantically, clicking from article to article. The pieces came together, forming a portrait of methodical evil. Beauregard had been known as the gentleman torturer, a predator who perfected psychological torment before ever laying a hand on his victims. The prosecution described years of abuse, beginning in childhood. And then the final, most chilling revelation. Convicted torturer dies in prison fire. 3 years ago, officially dead. Yet here he was, or someone like him. Experiments, surgical knowledge, psychological manipulation. Cordelia Fairfield hadn't just survived trauma. Someone had been deliberately testing, reshaping, controlling her. Holly's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. He dialed the Mobile County Sheriff's Department, heart hammering, and was transferred twice before finally reaching someone who could take him seriously. Because now he knew with terrifying clarity, the Fairfields' mansion was more than a home. It was a laboratory, and whatever Dr. Fairfield planned to contain was alive. Holly's Crane's fingers trembled around the phone as he spoke to Deputy Ashley Morrison. "I need to ask about Beauregard Rousseau," he said, voice low but urgent. There was a long pause. "Who is this?" "Holly's Crane. I'm doing construction work for Dr. Vincent Fairfield, and I think Beauregard Rousseau might not be as dead as everyone believes." "Mr. Crane," the deputy said carefully, "I need you to be very careful around that property. We've been monitoring the situation for some time." The words confirmed every terrifying suspicion Holly's had been trying to deny. The gifts, the disappearances, the impossible fact that the Fairfields were unprotected from a man legally dead for 3 years. "You're telling me I'm building a prison?" Holly's asked, his voice tight. "No," the deputy replied. "You might be building the only thing standing between Cordelia Fairfield and a monster who's been planning his reunion for 3 years." That night Holly's lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the deputy's warning replayed in his mind. He saw Cordelia's haunted eyes, the scars on her palms, the way she had asked if he'd ever built something to keep someone in. The pieces fell together with horrifying clarity. The next morning, an unseasonable cloud cover cast the Alabama sky in the dull gray of old pewter. Holly's arrived at the Fairfield property to find Cordelia waiting beside the foundation, her face pale but resolute. "You found the box," she said simply. Holly's nodded. "I spoke with someone at the sheriff's department last night." Cordelia's eyes flicked to the ground. "Then you know," she wrapped her arms around herself despite the morning warmth. "Vincent thinks I don't remember what Beauregard did to me as a child, that the trauma blocked it out, but I remember everything, every cigarette burn, every whispered threat, that no one would ever believe me because he was so charming, so perfect in public." Her voice wavered but didn't break. "He used to lock me in the root cellar behind our house, sometimes for days. He'd bring food and water, but only after I'd done exactly as he said. At first, small tasks, follow the rules, never speak unless spoken to. Then more demanding things. He was teaching me to be compliant, training me like a dog." Holly's felt his stomach churn. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I tried," she whispered. "When I was 12, I told my mother what Beauregard was doing. She called me a liar, sent me to my room without dinner. That night, Beauregard came. He said he knew I'd tried to tell. Then he showed me what happens to little girls who can't keep secrets." She pulled up her sleeve. A lattice of old scars ran from her wrist to her elbow, precise, deliberate, cruel. Holly swallowed hard. the weight of what she'd survived pressing down on him like a physical blow. Enough to hurt, but never deep enough to leave permanent damage. He said pain was just another way of showing love. Holly's had to turn away. The air felt too thick to breathe. When he finally steadied himself, his voice came out rough. "How did you get away from him?" Cordelia shook her head slowly. "I didn't, not really." She lifted her eyes to the gray sky. "When I turned 18, he helped me get into college, paid my tuition, bought my books, even helped me find my first apartment. I thought he'd changed, that maybe whatever sickness lived inside him had burned itself out." Her mouth tightened. "But no, he'd just become more sophisticated." The apartment was wired, cameras in every room, microphones hidden where you'd never think to look. He would call at random hours, telling her what she'd worn that day, what she'd eaten, who she'd spoken to. He knew everything, controlled everything. "When I tried to date," she said quietly, "the men didn't disappear violently. They just lost interest, overnight, completely." Later, she learned why. Beauregard had been visiting them. Calm conversations, gentle warnings about accidents, about how fragile a life could be when someone didn't mind their own business. Holly swallowed hard. "How did you meet Dr. Fairfield?" For the first time, warmth touched her voice, just a trace. Vincent was different, stronger. When Beauregard tried his intimidation, Vincent didn't fold. He dealt with sociopaths in his practice. He recognized Beauregard immediately. Her eyes darkened. That's when Beauregard escalated. "Vincent saved my life," she said simply. Beauregard made it clear he considered her property. The night before their wedding, he broke into Vincent's office and left a videotape on the desk. It showed things recorded when she was a child. Vincent watched only enough to understand the enemy. Holly's thought of the surgical instruments, the clinical notes, the meticulous planning. "Your husband's been preparing for this for years." "Vincent isn't violent," Cordelia said, "but he understands that some people can't be reasoned with, can't be fixed." When Beauregard was finally arrested, they thought it was over. Then the letters came. Even from prison, he found ways to remind them he was watching, waiting, planning. "And now," she whispered, "he's free." The gifts began 6 months ago. Small things at first. A single white rose on the doorstep. A box of chocolates, one piece missing, bitten just once. Then it became personal. A copy of her diary from when she was 15, pages she knew she had burned. A photograph of Vincent leaving his office, taken the day before it appeared in their mailbox. She turned toward the half-built structure, concrete walls rising from the ground like the foundation of a tomb. "This isn't a shelter, Mr. Crane," she said. "It's a trap." Her voice dropped lower. "Vincent has been studying Beauregard's mind for 15 years. And he's finally ready." Eyes cold, blue, piercing, like ice slowly sliding under your skin. Holly's felt a chill crawl up his spine. Every instinct screamed danger, yet there was a meticulous patience in Beauregard's movements that made the threat almost elegant. He stepped onto the gravel, slow, deliberate, surveying the property like a predator reading the layout of its prey. "Hello, Cordelia," he said, his voice smooth, cultured, completely at odds with the violence Holly's knew lay beneath. "It's been a long time." Cordelia didn't flinch. She held the small device in her hand, knuckles white, her gaze locked on him. "Not long enough," she said softly. "Not for you." Beauregard tilted his head, a faint smirk curving his lips. "Ah, but it has been long enough for the game to begin. You built me a gift, didn't you, Vincent? A perfect little playground. Hollies realized then that every detail of the shed, the soundproofing, the industrial locks, they weren't just for containment. They were part of the plan, a trap within a trap, a stage set for a final confrontation. Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper, steady but lethal. You won't touch anyone, not tonight. She pressed a hidden button on the device. Somewhere inside the shed, mechanisms clicked quietly, a countermeasure Beauregard had not anticipated. His smirk faltered for the briefest of moments, and Hollis felt the air change, charged with tension. The predator was about to realize he was no longer in control. And then Beauregard smiled fully, dangerously. We'll see, my dear sister, we'll see. The night hung heavy. Rain clouds churned overhead. The wind moaned through the moss-draped oaks. Somewhere in the shadows the game began, and for the first time in decades, the hunted were no longer helpless. Grabbed Beauregard by the shoulders, pushing with every ounce of strength, and Cordelia pressed the button on her device. With a low rumble, the shed's reinforced steel door snapped shut, locking him inside. Beauregard pounded against the walls, a blur of fury, cursing every echoing inch of concrete. Inside, the soundproofing absorbed his roars, turning them into distant vibrations Hollis felt through the soles of his boots. He won't get out, Hollis said, breathing hard, his eyes scanning the shed for the carefully hidden failsafes. Not unless he knows every trick you built in. Cordelia stepped closer, her hand brushing Hollis's arm, not for comfort, but as a silent acknowledgement of their victory. Her face was pale, but her eyes gleamed with something fierce and alive. This ends tonight, she said again, voice cold, unwavering. No more games, no more years of terror. Beauregard's screams shifted tone, becoming sharper, more cunning. He was already plotting, testing, analyzing every weakness he could sense. But the trap was perfect, designed for someone who thrived on control. And tonight, he had none. Hollis glanced at Cordelia. How long until he realizes it? She smiled faintly, a predator in her own right now. Long enough to regret ever thinking he could hurt me again. The storm overhead broke, rain slashing against the mansion, lightning illuminating the shed like a spotlight on a stage. Somewhere between the sound of the wind and Beauregard's muffled rage, Hollis realized they weren't just defending themselves. They were reclaiming years stolen from Cordelia's life. And for the first time, the air felt lighter, safe for now. Hollis felt the last tremors of resistance fade as Beauregard's body sagged against the chains, his manic grin softening into something eerily calm. The fog of nitrogen swirled around him, carrying the faint metallic tang of blood and fear, yet the room remained eerily silent, save for the hiss of the vents and the distant patter of rain against the shed's roof. Cordelia stood, brushing her hands against her silk blouse as if the nightmare had never touched her, though her eyes still burned with the memory of every scar, every whispered threat, every stolen moment of her childhood. It's over, she said softly, voice carrying the weight of decades. No more games, no more control, no more lies. Hollis finally set his hammer down, exhaling heavily, his forearm stinging from Beauregard's bite. He surveyed the room, taking in the reinforced walls, the chains that now held a monster, and the faint spirals of shadow thrown by the dim emergency lighting. The shed, once just blueprints on a desk, had become a crucible where the past and present collided. Dr. Fairfield, blood still streaking his cheek, finally allowed himself a small, grim smile. You did well, he said, glancing at Hollis and then Cordelia. It wasn't easy and it wasn't painless, but it's finished. He won't hurt anyone else. Not tonight, not ever again. Cordelia approached her brother, kneeling beside him, her hand brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I hope you understand now," she whispered, "that love isn't submission. You can't own it. You can't manipulate it. And you'll never have power over me again." Outside, the storm began to ease. Rain slid off the moss-draped oaks, washing the earth clean as though the world itself was offering absolution. Holly's helped Cordelia secure the final restraints and check the emergency systems one last time. They were exhausted, battered in spirit, but unbroken. And as Beauregard's breathing even, slack in the chains, the shed no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a turning point, a place where decades of fear and cruelty had finally met justice. Then he was gone. The only sounds in the shed were the quiet hiss of gas and Cordelia's soft, broken weeping. Later, after wrapping Beauregard's body in plastic, they carried him to a grave dug in the darkest corner of the property. Hollis felt the dead weight of the man, smelled the faintly cloying sweetness of death that no perfume could mask. Filling in the hole, scattering leaves over the disturbed earth, Hollis sank onto the porch with a glass of bourbon, trying to push from his mind the way Beauregard's eyes had looked in those final moments. The act of burial had been worse than witnessing the death itself. Beauregard's body had seemed unnaturally small, almost childlike, and Hollis couldn't shake the image of the boy who grew into the monster. Each detail, the head lolling against his shoulder, the unnatural lightness of the corpse, would haunt his dreams for years. Dr. Fairfield had paid him a generous bonus, enough to retire in peace, and the official story would claim Beauregard Rousseau had never returned, had never existed outside the fractured imagination of his victims. But Hollis knew the truth. He had helped build a trap for a monster, and in the end the monster had walked into it willingly. Whether that made the Fairfields heroes, or merely predators sharper and more patient than their prey, was a question he would carry for the rest of his life. He never worked another job requiring soundproofing. Some knowledge, he realized, was too heavy for any honest man to bear.